This is your before and after story. Southeastern College can help you prepare for a secure and fulfilling career in the growing healthcare field. We offer a wide range of careers to choose from, so whether you want to be a medical assistant, medical billing and coding specialist, nurse, surgical technologist, or another healthcare career, we've got you covered. Become a vital part of a healthcare team and make a real difference. Southeastern College, your future is bright. Visit sec.edu to get started.
A warmer friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast. And you've got an excellent podcast for you. Joining me in segment number 2, one of our good friends, Blake Lovell. He does great work over at Southeastern 14, is going to be joining me to take a little bit of a look at what we're all getting in the SEC as of right now. Certainly with 3 SEC teams in play, we're going to be diving in there. We saw a pair of 100-point outbursts from a pair of teams that we are going to be seeing in Mississippi State and Auburn, so we're going to be discussing that, and also just some of the teams nationally that he's a little bit bullish and bearish on as well, so going to have a great chat there in segment number 2, and then in the final segment, going to get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this College Basketball Wednesday as we hit some bank shots. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Jaden_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Really didn't get in a lot of Twitter/X questions today, but we had a fun day of college basketball on Tuesday. Let's take a look back at it, try to find some trends, and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
No team will go without a cover this season, as the last team that needed to be able to get a cover to get the goose egg off the board was Georgia Southern, and they did so against Tennessee. Georgia Southern falls by kind of 74-56, but this line was 34.5, so they cover, and it was not looking good for our good friends Georgia Southern in the first half. They were down 28 at the half, down 49-21, but they won the second half 35-25, and I'm going to be asking Blake about this Tennessee team as they've looked a little bit wobbly. As for Georgia Southern, they actually shoot 27% from the floor in this one. To their credit, they were able to hold in there in the turnover battle. They actually had 15 turnovers to Tennessee's 19, as Tennessee, they out-rebounded Georgia Southern by a count of 49-39, and Jonas Adu, 29 points, 11 rebounds. Nobody else for Tennessee had north of 7 points in this game, including Dalton Connect, so a little bit of concern there, but ding dong, the witch is dead. Every team has now got it covered thus far this season, and Monmouth, how about them being able to get another cover? This has been a nice start to the season for them. They lose, but they're able to cover double figures against Seton Hall by a count of 70-61. They're now 7-2-1 against the spread. And for Monmouth, the guy that has been able to help this team out quite a bit has been Xander Rice. He puts in there 20 points. Now, he went 5 of 19 from the floor, but 4 of 8 from 3. So he went 1 of 11 from inside the arc. For Seton Hall, they lose their turnover battle 16-13, but they were able to dominate down low with Jaden Bediako chipping in their 11 points and rebounds. For Seton Hall, they win that rebound battle 40-29, and for Seton Hall, they go just 4 of 16 from 3 and 22 of 32 at the charity stripe. So they left a little bit of something to be desired there, but for Seton Hall, they do get the job done. They do get that outright win, but not the cover. You are currently seeing Coppin State and Georgetown. I have to record this podcast a little bit in advance. Midnight Pacific, 3 o'clock a.m. Eastern is a Greg Peterson experience on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. That'd be 9 to midnight Pacific, so I record these recaps typically right around 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern, but unless if we see some massive scoring outburst, we need about 40 points in the final 7 minutes in Georgetown versus Coppin State. It's going to be another under for Coppin State as I do this. They are down 56-41, a Coppin State team that has exceeded 62 points once in regulation thus far this season against a D1 opponent. Meanwhile, Minnesota now 9-1 against the spread, and IUPUI, once again, they stink at being able to cover numbers. They are now 1-7 against the spread. Minnesota pounded the tar out of IUPUI. They were up 30 points at the half, showed a little bit of mercy late, 101-65. Minnesota goes 14 of 28 from 3 en route to a just absolute rout as Elijah Hawkins, just 2 points in this one, but 16 turnovers to 1 assist. Absolutely incredible effort as the Minnesota Gophers, they got Cam Christie going for 19 points, and for all the UEPUI, They got completely pounded on the boards by kind of 40-26. They were dominated in pretty much every facet of basketball. For UIC, this has been one of the best defenses in all of college basketball thus far this season, but UW Green Bay as a 12.5-point underdog. They win this game outright. They erase a double-digit deficit, 70-68 the final. As a matter of fact, UIC was up 9 points with about 4.5 minutes remaining, so not like they deserved a cover on like about 12.5 or so, but Noah Reynolds was just amazing for UW Green Bay. 31 big points, 3 assists. He was able to dial it up on 11 of 20 from 2-point range. The rest of the team took 30 field goal attempts, so they were clearly feeding him the ball. Toby Okani, a double-double for UIC, 15 points, 10 rebounds, but a UIC defense that had been allowing opponents to shoot less than 25% from 3 allowed UW Green Bay to go 5 of 11 from distance. They got warm, and they were able to get that done. You saw Arkansas at Pine Bluff just continue to play overs. This team is playing at warp speed. They lose to South Florida 104-86, and lots of spread drama as well. This was a game that was closing right around about 17 to 17.5 points as Pine Bluff. They were down 20 plus points in the closing sections of this game. They tried to be able to get there unless you got some sort of a generous number that was not available to many. You probably did not get there, but for Arkansas at Pine Bluff, 8 overs, 0 unders, and a push. They still have not played an under thus far this season, as for Pine Bluff, they did go 10 of 22 from 3-point range, while South Florida, they're starting to heat up as well. 10 of 27 from 3-point range, and for South Florida, every one of their scorers were able to reach at least 11 points, and for Arkansas Pine Bluff, every one of their starters at least 12 points as well. So big scoring outbursts there. We have been seeing in terms of college basketball quite a few overs, and we'll point that out in a few minutes just how demonstrative it's been. But this team has been very good to the under all season long, and that would be LIU, Long Island, and they played yet another one on Tuesday as they fall to UMass Lowell 78-65. They're able to cover the 17.5 to 18 point spread, and for Long Island, 1 over to 8 unders. That is tied with Jacksonville State and Rutgers for the highest under rate in all of college basketballs. For UMass Lowell, they go to just 2 of 14 from 3-point range, locked it down on defense. They won the rebound battle by a count of 51-27, but Long Island holds in there because they win the turnover battle 13-4. So, good on Long Island for not beating themselves. They were clearly outmanned physically, but they were able to hold in there, so that was a solid effort. And this was a solid effort from Duke, a Hofstra team that has been one of the best cover teams in all of college basketball the last decade or so. They're unable to get it done against Duke, 89-68 the final as Duke dials it up from 3. 10 of 22 from distance. I thought that Hofstra was going to have some problems with Kyle Filipowski, and boy did they. 28 points, 12 boards, 8 assists for Mr. Filipowski, while going 5 of 7 from 3-point range. Darlson Dunbar, 7 of 11 from 3 with 24 points, 8 boards. He had himself a pretty stellar showing, but for Hofstra, they lose the rebound battle 32-23. For Hofstra, they actually only commit 6 turnovers in this game, but Duke able to get a whole bunch of good looks that was able to allow them to be able to get that win and to be able to get that cover. How about the finish in Cincinnati versus Bryant? And I was someone that took north of 20 points with Bryant, and Bryant was down in this game about 6 points with, I would say, about 8 or so minutes remaining. They were holding right in there, and then from there, things just went completely down the toilet bowl. Cincinnati closes this game on a 31-5 run in the final 8+ minutes. Cincinnati wins 85-53, as Cincinnati has been one of your best money-making teams all season long as well. They did fall short against Xavier over the weekend, but all in all, this team be able to cover a lot of spreads. As for Cincinnati, they go 6 of 17 from 3-point range, and Aziz Bandengo, 12 points, 17 rebounds, 4 blocks, while Victor Lakeen was able to chip in their 12 rebounds as well. For Bryant, just 7 of 27 from 3-point range, and even though Bryant won the turnover battle 15-12, just getting absolutely plowed by 24 rebounds. They had 57 rebounds since they did to 33 of Bryant. Yeah, that's going to be costly, and Louisiana Tech rising up the boards as well. Another great defensive effort. They plow Southeast Louisiana by a count of 89-60, as for Louisiana Tech, they go 14 of 26 from 3, with Talik Chavez going 6 of 8 from distance. So a relatively good showing there against the Southeast Louisiana team that I think is going to be able to make a little bit of noise out in the Southland as well. And as I'm doing this podcast right now, it's looking like Northwestern State is going to be taking one on the chin. Currently, they're trailing Boise State 50-32. So a little bit of issue there. And then my DK Network Write-Up pick, I had the under in Maryland versus Alcorn State, and for Maryland, they went 14 of 30 from 3 after coming into this game shooting 23% from 3. Should have banked on a little bit more progression. That was a bad read by me, but this was a massive outlier as Maryland, they completely dump truck Alcorn State 105-65. For Maryland, they also went 31 of 40 at the free throw line, while Alcorn State went 8 of 16. For Maryland, the big performance in this one really went to the 15.7 rebounds of Julian Reese, but they got 6 different guys into double figures. Have to wonder if that'll wake up Maryland a little bit as they won the turnover battle by a count of 24. Alcorn State, while they committed just 8. So a big showing there, and for Prairie View, they've been one of your better over teams in college basketball this year. Not a lot of offense from them on Tuesday. They fall to Northern Iowa, 74-55. Prairie View was catching about 13.5 points, unable to cover there as Northern Iowa. They score 74 points on 41 field goals because they go 24 of 34 at the free throw line. You saw Northern Iowa as well win the rebound battle by a count of 37-29. Nate Heisey, 25 points, 10 rebounds, and for Bowen Bourne, 13 plus points now in 3 straight games after he was off to a rough start to the season. And I was mentioning it, overs, they have been quite hot in college basketball all season long, and they continue to be quite profitable. We've got a few games pending for Tuesday as I record this, but overall for the season, overs are hitting at about 51.4%, 793 overs to 751 unders, while home underdogs, they're starting to rise up a little bit as well, 181, 175, and 6 against the spread, while favorites overall still hitting a little bit higher than underdogs, sub 72, sub 65, and 19 against the spread. And if you look at the last 7 days in college basketball, certainly has been dog heavy as favorites hitting at just 47.5%, 111, 123, and 3 against the spread of home underdogs, 32 and 30 against the spread in the last 7 days. And last 7 days, we have seen a few more unders with 118 unders to 115 overs, and I believe we have had 4 pushes along the way as well. So that's what we're seeing in college basketball right now, and that's what we all got on Tuesday. Coming next, let's talk a little SEC with Blake Lovell, who does amazing work over at Southeastern 14. We'll get his thoughts on the trio of teams that are going to be in action on Wednesday, get a little bit of a lay of the land with the conference in general, and just teams that he's bullish and bearish on. That's up next, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, UMass Peterson, now a part of the UMBC Family Podcast.
Sports Betting Innovative Analytics has taken the guesswork and emotion out of sports betting to bring you an innovative and trustworthy resource to enhance your journey to becoming a winning player. With industry-leading money-back guarantee options backed by their sophisticated modeling, they want to introduce you to a system that's not widely seen or available to help you beat the bookmaker. Specializing in NBA, college basketball, and WNBA, your first week is always free. Get started at SBIA1.com today.
We're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast, and it is always great to be joined by this man as Blake Lovell. He does absolutely amazing work over at Southeastern 14, taking a look at this crazy game of basketball that we all know and love. I know that they're going to be changing their name soon once we get 16-plus teams out there in the SEC, but this year it has been topsy-turvy with these SEC teams. Blake does a great job of gauging those, and he really does a great job gauging all things college basketball. You're able to follow him on Twitter /X over at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, it's always great to have you aboard. Thank you.
I always enjoy it, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me. And Blake, we are doing this on late Monday. This will be coming out very early Wednesday morning, so we don't know necessarily how things for Tuesday went. But that said, in terms of what we saw this weekend, how big was it for the SEC just to be able to restore some order after, as we know, 2 weeks ago, we see Kentucky go down, you see Mississippi State lose to Southern, and for them to restore order, going out there and just beating down Tulane, for having Alabama not necessarily win, but look very strong against Purdue, Tennessee toppling Illinois. I thought that it was just a very big weekend in general for the SEC after things were very wobbly for them about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I agree, Greg. It's something where, as we've talked since the season started, it's one where the SEC has given up some pretty good opportunities against, good competition. For example, Tennessee had to win against Wisconsin, right? But they lost the games that meant the most in the Maui Invitational, and they get one back by beating Illinois. Like you mentioned, Kentucky drops a game after everyone's all on board. Drops one you didn't think they would, but now, they're back heading in the right direction. Like you said, Alabama, I think, played well against Purdue. The defense is what it is at this point. They're going to give up a lot of points, but they're going to score a lot of points too and have a chance to beat pretty much anybody because of that. And, Auburn putting up 104, Mississippi State putting up 106. Would not have expected that from those two teams in those particular matchups, but that's exactly what they did. And so, yeah, just kind of leaving some opportunities on the table against good teams and also, losing some games you shouldn't. That's kind of been the theme of the non-conference so far for the SEC, but it did seem like even in Ole Miss, staying unbeaten, getting a win at UCF, those kind of wins that really put you in a pretty good spot here with only a couple weeks left to go in non-conference play.
Oh, absolutely. And for Ole Miss, it feels like it's a regular season version of Survive and Advance, as they have not won a lot of games comfortably, but they keep on pulling off those wins. And I do think that that is going to be very instrumental for them. And it has been interesting to just really gauge this conference in general, because we also did see one of the big headlines for the weekend was what Auburn was able to do, just absolutely beating the brakes off of Indiana. This after they lose on the road against Appalachian State. As we know, true road games are hard to be able to win. I don't care who you're playing in college basketball. And you knew that the good people out there in Boone, they would show up and show out in that game against Appalachian State. But what did that game that Auburn played against Indiana tell you? Because I'm not sure if that told me more about Auburn and how high-powered they could be, or just the level of dysfunction right now we have with Indiana, because that has been a rough watch this year as well.
Yeah, I think probably a little both, as you would probably also agree with. That's kind of what stood out because, again, it's, the talk with Auburn kind of start the season was, all right, well, this team, has to play better defense, specifically in the second half. Well, the defense has gotten better. The offense, been some ups and downs, as we know, and, of course, going to that game against Appalachian State, as I said, I applaud them for playing that type of game because that's not the type of game a lot of teams will play. But I think you can certainly see the upside with Auburn, even though, again, they lose that game last weekend and maybe people start to think, does this team have issues? But I think you can just see the upside. Now, of course, they're not going to hit 14 threes every game. They're a better shooting team, I think, than they were a season ago. But that's just not going to be something they do night in and night out. But the fact is, that's why they got Aiden Holloway, someone who can step out and make shots. That's why they got Denver Jones, and so that was kind of encouraging, I think, to see that in a game against Indiana. Because if those guys can't consistently be, 3-point threats for them, that just adds a whole new dynamic to their offense, which, at this point is what? It's pretty much driven by Jalen Williams, Janai Broome. I know he had 2 points in that game, but we know he's still one of the best players in the SEC. So Auburn's depth is pretty good, and I think they're a team that, again, you feel like you're still trying to get a full grasp on, kind of what they're going to be come NCAA tournament time, and they've got a long way to go to kind of figure that out. They've got 3 months or so at this point. But I think the pieces are there, and it's going to be interesting to see how Bruce Pearl continues to kind of mold this team because they've gotten so much better defensively. And the offense, again, if they're shooting the ball well and they don't really beat themselves with turnovers, there's a lot of upside with this Auburn team.
I do think that there is quite a bit of upside there, and when it comes to this Auburn bunch, certainly they're a better shooting team than they were a season ago as well, and that's just so massive because that was their main kryptonite from a season ago. A little bit of a new look team with Janai Broome not doing as much down low, but still has been a pretty stout team on that front, as Blake Lovell, who does absolutely tremendous work over at Southeastern 14, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and Auburn is going to be one of those teams of note for Wednesday that we're going to be watching play against UNC Asheville in the old Rocket City Classic. And I would be surprised if UNC Asheville is able to give them much of a game, but we have seen stranger things happen. But in terms of the SEC, most of these teams, they are going to be on full display on Saturday. And something that I thought was very interesting, and this is going to be a big test for them, was Texas A&M in the game that they played against Memphis on Sunday. Now they're going to have a big chance on Saturday going against Houston. And you can pull off a win against Houston. That's really saying something. But what did you make out of that A&M versus Memphis game? Because with Texas A&M, their team I still think is one of the best out there in the SEC. They've got 3 losses right now, but they've really battle-tested themselves. They played that nip and tuck game against Iowa State. They played a game against Virginia. They were right there against Florida Atlantic as well. So this is certainly a team that has been through a lot of battles already. And even though they've got 3 losses, I still feel pretty solid about them. And I thought that loss that they took against Memphis just told me a little bit more about Memphis.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's kind of one of those situations now for A&M where you feel like, they're finally getting back to having everyone available. And, of course, Tyrese Radford was out, for at least 2 or 3 games. I think he was out 3 games before he came back against Memphis. So, working him back into the mix, we know, in my opinion, he's the second best player on the team behind Wade Taylor. And so I think that's one where getting him back is significant because remember, too, this is a team that we thought would have Julius Marble, but I know Buzz Williams said this towards the end of October, he's been away from the team since then. Depth-wise, that just kind of is one of those things that where you kind of need everybody you can get, whether they're at the guard position or, in the front court. And getting Radford back significant, maybe a Manny Obaseki who, had a 21-point outburst in that game against Memphis. Maybe he's kind of that guy who takes a step forward, because I feel like we talked about that with him over the past couple of seasons. But yes, it was not the best performance, I think, for A&M, but I kind of said the same thing, Greg. I said, I know they lost the game, but I really have not changed my opinion on A&M all that much. I mean, I know they lost the game to Florida Atlantic. That's nothing to be upset about. Again, they were down Radford at Virginia, which I think if they had him, that's a different game because, Wade Taylor doesn't have as much pressure on him handling the ball. And let's also say this isn't the greatest three-point shooting team out there. But, Greg, I can also tell you that I don't think that Wade Taylor and Tyrese Radford, the two best players on the teams, are going to go a combined 0-14 from three like they did against Memphis. So I still look at A&M, the record 7-3, and like you said, a huge opportunity coming up on Saturday against Houston. They're going to have to play better offensively to have a chance to win that game. But I still think this is one of those teams that I would probably be surprised if they're not, finishing in the top four in the SEC somewhere.
Yep, I would be surprised as well. And I do think that it's just so interesting to take a look at this NCC landscape right now because it's not quite what we expected coming into the season. As Blake Lovell, who does great work over at Southeastern 14, is joining me on Coast to Coast Soups because you mentioned it. Right now, the lone team that's undefeated in the SEC is Ole Miss, and you've only got one team with only one loss. That's South Carolina, and the South Carolina loss that they took, a 5-point road loss against Clemson, which is honestly looking better and better by the day. And how do you take a look at the hierarchy of the SEC right now as compared to how you did at the beginning part of the season? Because I'm still not set to say that South Carolina is better than, say, a team like Kentucky, which obviously Kentucky came in with a lot of fanfare, and many people, and I'm one of those people, thought that South Carolina was going to be dead last in the conference. At the same time, I think we've gotten beyond the point of thinking, oh yeah, South Carolina is going to regress to the point where they're dead last once again. And I do think that's sort of trying to find that commonality between, all right, there are some teams that have taken losses because they played a really good schedule, and then there are other teams that they have surprised a little bit, but at the same time, we might see a little regression.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at this league, like you said, kind of what we thought coming into the season and where things are right now. And that's where I don't think I've changed my opinion significantly on any of those teams that we had towards the top. Again, Tennessee has 3 losses. Alabama has 3 losses. Like we said, A&M's got 3 losses. Kentucky and Auburn got a pair of losses. I don't know that I've changed my opinion all that much on those 5 teams because I think, to me, those were probably the top 5 teams coming into the league. Now, of course, there's one team I've not added to that mix, which was, I thought, a top 5 team in the SEC. That's Arkansas, which, has certainly had its ups and downs. But if you take the Greensboro game out of the equation, right, it's like, well, they've lost to Memphis, North Carolina, and Oklahoma. Those aren't bad losses. They didn't play well in some of those games for sure, especially the Carolina and Oklahoma games, but they're not bad losses to this point, and they're a team too, whether it's the Brazil injury, which I know he wound up playing against Oklahoma, but it's just one of those where I think it's taking this team a little while, to come together, Greg, which it's like, stop me if you heard that before with an Eric Musselman team that takes a little while and they figure it out. I tend to think this will be the same situation with Arkansas, so we shouldn't be surprised, but then it is really trying to figure out a South Carolina. Where do you put them kind of in that conversation? I think you said it from the start. I think that Clemson game, they lost, but I think that told me more than anything, probably just in terms of, I think South Carolina's here to stay. I don't think they're going anywhere because, that group of Beachy Johnson, BJ Mack, Miles Studi, and Talon Cooper, that 4 right there, I think those guys are good enough to keep South Carolina right here in this top half of the SEC moving forward, whether that's, eclipsing a team like Florida or Missouri and teams like that, or Mississippi State maybe. As we said, it's hard to kind of figure out what you're going to get Mississippi State with, 59 points back-to-back against Georgia Tech and Southern, then 106 against Tulane. And, of course, they're going to get Toulouse Smith back sooner rather than later, it seems like at this point. So, yeah, like this top part of the SEC is fascinating because there's going to be a lot of movement back and forth as there always is. But then it's like, okay, where does Ole Miss figure into that? They haven't lost a game yet. And you said it, Greg. It's like, hey, they may only beat teams by 2 points here and 1 point there, but they've won every game they played, and no other SEC team can say that to this point. They've given up losses that they shouldn't. Ole Miss has not done that. They've beaten everybody on their schedule. And oh, by the way, there are other 4 games that are left on the non-conference. Those are all winnable, and they're going to be favorites in all of those. So, yeah, the SEC is kind of set up to be a fascinating conference, even though there's been some ups and downs as usual in the non-conference portion.
Oh, there certainly have been some ups and downs, and I do need to get your thoughts on this team as well, because it's been almost a little bit of a change for a lot of these teams in the SEC. We are noticing a lot of these teams going a little bit more up-tempo, Auburn puts up north of 100 points over the weekend. Mississippi State puts up north of 100 points over the weekend. We'll see what they can do for an encore on Wednesday. I don't think either of those teams are going to be getting to 3 bills or anything like that, but we have noticed a lot more offense, and that's no more prevalent than what we've seen out of Tennessee, a Tennessee team in which I never thought I would see them give up 60 points and a half, but they did that against North Carolina a few weeks ago. But they get a nice win against Illinois. They look very strong on offense. Again, the defense has been a little bit shaky, but what do you make out of this Tennessee bunch that has been looking much more prevalent with their offense? But we did notice 1 or 2 doldrum periods when they were playing out there in Maui in terms of a few rough patches, and it certainly does not look like the same defense that we've seen in past years.
Yeah, and I think, Tennessee, and we talk about themes with the SEC, I feel like the theme of the SEC so far, a month in has been how long is it going to take for teams just to have their full team, on the court. And I think we finally saw that for Tennessee against Illinois, where you have everyone there, the top 8 guys. They all played 15 or more minutes. And, that starting 5 of James, Adu, Vescovy, Ziegler, and Connect. How does a 5 that's going to win you a lot of games when all those guys are available, no one's injured, everybody's out there, which, again, it seems like finally they're getting into their groove there. And that's where, having a Jordan Gainey, a Jemai Mashack, Toby Awaka off the bench, like that group right there for Tennessee, that team, again, is going to win you some games, Greg. And like you said, none of us could have ever expected them to give up that many points at North Carolina and a half, but they did. And like we mentioned, they gave up those opportunities against Purdue, Kansas, and North Carolina. Those were all big chances for Tennessee. And even though the scoreline felt a little bit deceiving against North Carolina, they had their opportunities in some of those games. And so now that I think you see them win a game like this against Illinois, yes, there could still be some of those stretches offensively where they have, just kind of into a lull a little bit. But that's where I think a Dalton Connect is really standing out. And I think everyone that's watched Tennessee knows that now. I mean, he's the guy. Like, he is the guy offensively, I think, that maybe they haven't had just to be able to take over and get them the points they need in those crucial situations. Even if the defense slips a little bit, still going to be really good defensively. I think that, again, having their entire group back now to kind of get in a groove where everyone kind of knows, your spot in the rotation, it's as good of a rotation, I think, as anybody in the SEC. If they can just kind of keep building off of this Illinois win, then, yeah, I would say right now, I still think Tennessee, if we take every team at their best, I still think Tennessee is the best team in the SEC, just because I think they have all the pieces you need to be able to make that run deep into the NCAA tournament, maybe even a little bit more so than a Kentucky, than an Alabama, A&M and teams like that we've mentioned.
Yep, it's not necessarily your father's Tennessee team. Certainly they have been giving up a few more points or playing a little bit more up-tempo, but the offensive upside certainly is there much more than it has been in past years. Having a guy in Dalton Connect who lives up to his name, he's able to connect from the outside. That's just so massive for this bunch, as well as we do have Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I mentioned it for Wednesday. We really have 3 teams from the SEC that are going to be in action. The 2 teams that were able to put up triple digits, and then LSU, which LSU has been a bit of a disappointment thus far this year. But if they lose to Alabama State, then we're really looking at some issues. But in terms of the national landscape of college basketball, we're a few teams maybe outside the SEC that has caught your eye either to the positive or the negative thus far this season, and you've had to change your expectations that you had for them coming into the season.
I know this is an obvious one, but I think when you watch Arizona play, I mean, how do you just not be just completely wowed at times? I mean, it's just, how do you not? And again, I know it's something where we had high expectations for this team coming in, but it's like, I still think we have to talk about just how impressive they have been at times. And, again, it's obviously this matchup, which I'm sure, you're going to talk a lot about, the Purdue-Arizona matchup on Saturday. But I think for me, it is very interesting just to kind of see where Arizona is at right now, knowing they're coming off this win against Wisconsin. They got this, row of games against Purdue, Alabama, and Florida Atlantic, which is just such a fun slate when you think about all the matchups there and the way this thing sets up. That is obviously one for me. But I will also kind of say this one too, Greg, where it's like, I know we all had high expectations for Florida Atlantic coming into the season, but I was one of the most curious, I thought, storylines and the things that had my most attention coming into the season was just to see, how does this team go from the way they finished last season? We know the pieces are back. How do they take that and now translate it into this season? And, they've gotten some good wins along the way. We know they had the disappointing loss to Bryant, the disappointing game against Illinois. They felt like they had a great shot to win that one. And like I said, they've got that opportunity coming up against Arizona here in, less than 2 weeks now. So I know those are kind of the team that everybody talks about, but I think those continue to be 2 teams that I've just been so fascinated by in terms of just, their overall kind of trajectory, whether it is seeing what an FAU does coming off of the end of last season, or just seeing how Tommy Lloyd continues to push this Arizona program forward. I'll add another one quickly, Greg. I mean, Memphis is a team where, seeing them play, that's what we were kind of joking about. It's like they're 3-1 against the SEC right now. They've beaten Missouri, they've beaten Arkansas, they've beaten A&M. Of course, they lost the tight game at Ole Miss, but I think seeing what Javon Quinterly has done for them, coming over from Alabama, that's been another team I've really kind of kept my eye on just to see, what does this Memphis team look like? We talked about earlier with Arkansas. Now versus what do they look like come March? Because that's a really tough proposition, I think, for opponents, given, I think, the talent that's on this roster, and just kind of seeing, again, an interesting stretch coming up for them. They played Clemson on Saturday. They got that game against Virginia after that. All three of those teams, I think, have really just kind of been at the top of mind for me just in terms of their storylines and where they are right now.
For Arizona, when you're putting up north of 95 points against Wisconsin, that's really saying something. I mean, man, it's hard to get enough possessions if you shoot like north of 75% from the floor to be able to do that. So I'm right there with you with Memphis. I almost feel like they're almost cut a little bit from the same cloth as Arkansas, to your point, typically a team that ascends late, but they've really been able to mesh. You were referencing that game against Texas A&M, had me thoroughly impressed with Memphis. And I always say this with coaches, and I don't know if you agree / disagree, but I feel like just like players can turn a corner, coaches can as well. And for Penny Hardaway, I thought that 2 years ago, he really fell short up until that NCAA tournament run where they were actually right there in that round of 32 game against Gonzaga. And I really felt like he wasn't coming along as a coach. But what I've seen out of Penny over the last 24 months has been quite surprising. And I do always think that it's important that these coaches, they learn from time to time, and these guys get better as things go along. And I think Penny certainly fits that mold.
No, I agree with you. You remember the conversations, Greg, like everybody's talking about it. They're like, okay, what's going to happen here in this situation? Like at that point, it felt like, are they ever going to kind of hit that next gear, which was, again, the reason they hired him, right? Like everyone thought this is a slam dunk. Like we hire Penny, everything's going to change. We're going to be, in Final Fours, if not, every other year, we're going to be there very often. And of course, that just hasn't happened at this point. And that was kind of a pivotal, like you said, year to see how do things translate. And then I want to say, what was it last year? They got off to the 2-2 start, but then, you started to see some things change a little bit. And some of those games, like the Auburn game last year, felt like sort of a turning point for them in terms of like getting a big win that had kind of built up some momentum at that point. And then again, just to kind of see where things went from there. And of course, as we know, the NCAA tournament loss did not look as bad given what FAU wound up doing to that point. I agree with you. Like they have sort of figured out what they need to do to be successful. That comes with recruiting a lot of talented players. And I think, as we always said, like there's going to be a lot of players who want to play for Penny Hardaway because you see the style that they play. And we mentioned Javon Quinterly earlier. I mean, there's obviously a lot of things that are very appealing to go from Alabama to playing in Memphis. There are a lot of things that just connect. And so I'm very curious just to see, again, how this season kind of unfolds for them because, I said it a minute ago, 2 big games coming up against Clemson and Virginia, really, kind of going into this AAC, which, as always, right? I mean, you just kind of look at the landscape of this conference right now. We talked about what FAU's become and kind of everything that's there. Like, it's just going to be very interesting to see how Penny continues to move this program forward.
Yep, I agree with you. I do think that it's going to be so fascinating to take a look at this, as Penny has really been one of the coaches I've warmed up upon in the last 24 months as well. And I do think that there's a lot of upside with Memphis, and there's always upside with this podcast when you join, Blake, because you do absolutely tremendous work over at Southeastern 14. You truly do an amazing job covering this game of college basketball. So let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I always appreciate it, Greg. Like you said, you can check out all of our SEC stuff, Southeastern 14. You can find us on YouTube there. Just search for Southeastern 14, all kinds of SEC basketball stuff pretty much daily at this point. So find all that there. And then, yeah, everything else, all other college basketball stuff, you can find me on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell.
And Blake does an absolutely incredible job taking a look at this game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every time he joins this podcast, he always lends amazing insights and did so once again today. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis for every game on the betting board for this College Basketball Wednesday as we hit some big shots. We're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Blake Lovell, who does amazing work over at Southeastern 14. He does a great job taking a look at all those SEC teams, but on top of that, really the entire landscape of college basketball. He's got his finger on the pulse of it, does an amazing job taking a look at all these teams, and every single time he joins this podcast, he lends absolutely tremendous insight. So big thanks to Blake for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast to give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this College Basketball Wednesday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at GNN_D1. We are going to be going in Las Vegas rotation order. This is where we go with the major conferences first and then the games that involve teams from smaller conferences. This includes the Southland, the MEAC, the SWAC, the Patriot League, the Atlantic Sun, along with the NEC, the Big South. I believe that I've hit them all. Those are going to be games that are going to be listed at the bottom. So how about if we get things started with 625, 626 on the betting board? It's a battle for Florida International. It's the road to face off against Florida Atlantic. Florida Atlantic finds themselves as a pretty sizable favorite of 21 to 21.5 points. So on this game is anywhere between 152 and 153. Strange things happen in these interstate rivalries. I certainly do think that Florida Atlantic is a better team, but them laying north of 20 points is something that I just can't get behind. I set my line at 16, so I'm going to be willing to take the points with Florida International. Florida National is going to be absolutely decimated down low. You've got Vladislav Golden, who's been able to do a tremendous job as a 7'1" big man that's able to give you 2 blocks, 16 points, right around 7 boards per game. And for Florida National, you don't have a single guy that's giving you north of 4.5 rebounds per game. They could really use a little bit more out of a pair of guys, Mohamed Sanogo along with Seth Pinckney. They're combined to average about 9 points, 6 rebounds per contest. You do get a block per game out of Pinckney, but these guys have just not affected a lot down low. And then Jonathan Ibar has been able to give you about 4.5 rebounds per game. But what Florida National does a very good job of is they make things just all scrambled and they force a bunch of turnovers. They are getting 13.2 steals per game, and Ontario Dean is 4.4 steals per game. That leads all of college basketball. He has been tremendous at being able to take the ball away. Meanwhile, you do have an FIU team that, if you're going to be playing that sort of style, you need to shoot a little bit better from three-point range. Dean, he's been able to shoot about 38.5% from three-point range with his 14 points, 5 assists per game. But as a collective, they are shooting just 30% from three-point range, so that's a little bit of an issue. But this is a Florida Atlantic team as well that they've been very fascinating in terms of their defenses. Last year, they were a top 40 team in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis. We have seen them fall outside the top 125 now, so they have been showing some issues there. It is a Florida International team that they themselves, I was talking about them being able to generate steals. They are a little bit of an all-or-nothing team with that regard. As for FIU, in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis, they're about 159th in the country. And for FAU, you certainly should have your guards be able to do a solid job in Elijah Mitchell along John L. Davis, combined for about 27.5 points per game. Both of these guys combined for about 3.5 steals, with Davis currently shooting 48.5% from three-point range. I do think we might see things taper off just a little bit in terms of this offense. They are still dealing with the injury to Nicholas Boyd. He's been out for really the last 5 or 6 games, so I don't expect to see him in this game. But the guy that's been able to step up recently has been Jalen Gaffney with about 3.5 assists, 7.5 points per game. But I do think that Florida International, they're going to get pounded down low, but I do think that they're going to force some steals against an FAU team that has been pretty good at taking care of the ball. They only have turned the ball over about 11 times per contest to be able to hold in this game. It is a Florida Atlantic team that they've given up at least 74 points in 3 of their last 5 games. You've got an FAU team that has honestly actually given up fewer than 70 points in 3 of their last 4 games, but I do think that things get cranked up tempo. I do think that Florida National is going to have some struggles with regards to guarding Florida Atlantic, but generates enough steals to be able to hold in there. Semi-total 154, looking at the over. Florida National, top 75 team in terms of total possessions per game, and going to be willing to take the points with FIU. Said Florida International as a 16-point underdog, 627, 628 on the betting board. It is Toledo, and they are going to be playing us some Marshall. Marshall is an underdog of 9 to 9.5 points, and your total on this game, it is between 159 and 160.5. Did semi-total at a 163.5. I'm going to be diving in on the over. This is a Marshall bunch, and they certainly look to play a little bit more of the scorcher style. They play very up-tempo. They look to generate some turnovers, and Sometimes they're able to get those turnovers. Sometimes they are not able to get those turnovers. They bring in someone in Keyshawn Voles, who last season over at Maryland Eastern Shore was able to generate about 2 steals per contest. He's been really an integral part of an offense that has seen a little bit of a fall off in terms of their three-point shooting. Marshall last season, they were a mid-30s three-point shooting team. Not amazing, but not terrible by any stretch of the imagination. They lose their top 2 scorers from season ago, and Tavion Kinsey, along with Andrew Taylor, and now they're shooting 27% from 3. I do think that Camden Kerfman, someone who shot north of 37% from distance last year, going to be able to rise up from his 31.5% three-point shooting, but it's going to be all about what you get down low for Marshall, as you've got Obiano Onchile Killian. So remember, he had 4 blocks per contest in non-conference play 2 years ago. He's been able to give the team nearly 2 blocks, 14.5 points per game, and then Nate Martin has been able to do a nice job down low with a block and a half and 9.5 rebounds per game himself, but certainly is a Marshall offense that has seen a little bit of a fall off there, yet they're still in the top 40 in terms of total possessions per game. And for Toledo, they're not super duper up tempo, but they are still quite up tempo. And for the Toledo bunch, they were rough with their defense last year, and shock, surprise, they're having a tough time once again this year. 253rd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, actually allowing 1.2 points more per 100 possessions at home rather than on the road. It's not quite the same three-point shooting team as they were a season ago, but they're still shooting 38.5% from three-point range, as you have Raheem Moss along with Dante Maddox combining for about 31.5 points per game. Both give you about 2.5 assists, 1.4 steals per game. Tyler Cochran has done a nice job being able to generate about 2.3 steals per game as well. It is a Toledo team that is going to gamble for turnovers. If they don't get the turnover, they typically allow a little bit of an easier bucket. So I do think that is going to be a driving force with regards to this total. Toledo not quite the rocket ship that they were on offense this season ago, but I mean, they still have been able to do a nice job getting past the 70-point plateau in 4 of their last 5 games. Meanwhile, you've got a Marshall bunch that it's been rough for them with regards to their defense, giving up 78 plus in 4 of their last 5 games. Showed a little bit of a heartbeat on the defensive side of things against Ohio, but I do think that for Toledo, just going to be too much in the backcourt for them. Marshall has a little bit of an edge down low, but for Toledo, Tyler Cochran has been a highly stretchable guy, and they've been able to get a little bit more in the 6'8" combo player in Andre Lortitson. Hopefully I said that correctly. He's currently shooting 55% from three-point range. I don't think that that'll quite keep up, but the overall versatility of Toledo going to be a little bit too much for Marshall, so I did set this line at a 9.5. I'm willing to lay up to 9 with Toledo, and with regards to the total, I set mine at a 163.5. I think that you get a nice up and down game. So looking at the over, and I'm going to be willing to lay up to 9 with Toledo. 629, 630 on the betting board. Little Rock is playing us to UT San Antonio. Meet for the road runners, who are anywhere between 6 and 6.5 point underdogs. So it's between 164 and 165, and I did set my total at a 165. So you're at the 164. I'm going to be willing to take a look at the over. It's a UTSA bunch that certainly I think is going to be having a little bit of a tough time out in the American. This is a big step up in competition for them. And for UT San Antonio, it's been really about what you've been able to get in the front court, as the backcourt pieces, they're just not there for this team right now. You lose your top scorer in Yasaf Metter over the offseason. They have been able to get about 13 points per contest out of Christian Tucker. Tucker's been able to shoot in the mid-30s from three-point range, doling out 6 assists to about 2 turnovers per game, and that is one thing that UTSA has been able to do a solid job of. They really don't turn the ball over. They're only turning it over about 11.5 times per game. With their tempo, that's not too bad, but you're really relying upon Dre Fuller doing a little bit of everything for this team, with Mr. Fuller, 6'6" combo player who last year shot about 36.5% from 3. That sounded more like 29% this year, but he's been able to give the team 11 points, 7.5 rebounds per game, and then they're having to rely upon the true 6'11", 7-footer in Carlton Lingard to be able to give you about 6.5 boards per contest as well. So UTSA has some nice size on them, but Jameer Chaplin, who comes in from South Florida, he's been able to do a nice job holding it down defensively with about 7.5 boards per contest. For this Little Rock team, they've been dealing with quite a few injuries, as Kalen KK Robinson has been out of the fold over the last 5 games, and that has caused a little bit of strife with regards to facilitation, but they have found someone in Bradley Douglas who's done a nice job being able to dish out about 3.5 assists per contest, so that has been highly helpful for a Little Rock team that did bring in a lot of transfers during the offseason. They don't necessarily have their full allotment of guys. They're dealing with that injury, and then on top of that, Mikal Mitchell, who was over at Arkansas a season ago, he has yet to be cleared for the team, so it's been a little bit of an issue. But for a Little Rock bunch that really is a top 25 team in the country in terms of total possessions per game, for them to only turn the ball over about 12 times per contest, they've been able to do a good job with that regard. You've had Deontay Gordon do a nice job chipping in there about 15 points, 6 rebounds per game. So while while UTSA does have some size, you've got Little Rock, who should be able to match up on the glass. This is a Little Rock team that feels like they're a little bit more sure-handed from the outside. Don't think Jameer Chaplin's going to continue the 46% three-point shooting that he's been having. That has been absolutely remarkable. But you've got for Little Rock a bunch of guys in the backcourt that I think are playing really well in tandem with one another. You've got a UTSA team that I feel like is also a little bit of a paper tiger, because a lot of people are going to take a look at UTSA and think, oh, they come in having won 4 of their last 5 games. Well, take a look at those wins. They squeak one out at home against Lamar. They beat Incarnate Word. They win by 2 against Houston Christian. They beat a non-D1 team. So they haven't really challenged themselves too much. And Little Rock, it's not like they're playing against amazing competition, but knocking off Tulsa, Arkansas State, those carry a little bit more weight for me. So I did set Little Rock as a 9-point favorite. I think that they just outclass this UTSA team and they match up really well. So I'm going to be one to lay the number. And did set my total at 165 with a pair of teams that they're absolutely gunning it. And pair of teams have certainly been having their woes offensively. This is a pair of teams that, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, you are currently finding them both outside of the top 250. So we're going to be taking a look at this total over, and I'm going to be willing to lay up to 8.5 with Little Rock. 631, 632 on the betting board. Murray State, it's a road face-off against Mississippi State. Mississippi State is a favorite of 16.5 points, and your total is 136.5. With Mississippi State, did set them as a 16.5 point favorite. So we're going to be waiting on a little bit of line movement here. If we could get down to a 16, willing to lay with Mississippi State 17 or more, that is going to be my buy point on Murray State. And I also set my total at a 136.5. This opened up at a 137.5, and that would be a buy point for me on the under. It's a Murray State unit that has been a little bit all over the place in terms of what they've been able to get down low, but Nick Ellington, coming in from Eastern Illinois, has been able to fortify things. He's done a nice job being able to pile up in the neighborhood about 8 or so rebounds per game, and that's going to be important against a Mississippi State team that, despite not having Tolu Smith, they've had Jimmy Bell Jr. be able to log about 10 rebounds per game. You also have Charles Matthews, DJ Jeffries, both giving you about 6 rebounds per game, and it's a Mississippi State team that truly has been about as Jekyll and Hyde as we've seen it. We talked about it a little bit with Blake Lovell. I mean, how about this for Mississippi State? Over the course of their last 5 games, they have scored 66, 74, 59, 59, and 106 points. I sort of tend to think that the first 4 results are a little bit more true than the 106 points than they put up against Tulane. Meanwhile, when it comes to Murray State, their defense has been all over the place as well. Defensively, Murray State in the last 5 games has given up 53, 76, 72, 67, and 83 points. So you've got a pair of teams that have had quite a few wild outliers. For Murray State, they are going to be very reliant upon their backcourt. Jacoby Wood, Rob Perry, they combine for about 20.5 points per game, with Wood shooting about 45% from 3-point range. To the credit of Murray State, they've only turned the ball over about 10 times per contest. This is a Mississippi State defense, though, that they generate about 9 steals per game. It does feel like Mississippi State, not quite the same team on defense this year as they have been in past years, but this is still a bunch at 6th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So I do think that Murray State going to be up against it a little bit with their defense still lacking from a season ago, 270th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but to the credit of Murray State, allowing 5.1 points fewer per 100 possessions on the road rather than at home. So this is a spot where at 17 or more, I'm going to be willing to take the points with Murray State. 16 or less, I'm going to be willing to lay it with Mississippi State, and anything north of a 136.5, going to be diving in on this total under as well. 633, 634 on the betting board. You've got Louisville, and they're going to be playing us at Arkansas State, and Arkansas State does find themselves as an underdog of 5 to 5.5 points. So on this game is 147, and set Louisville as a 3-point favorite. So it's a circumstance where I'm going to be willing to take the points with Arkansas State. I just still have not bought in on this Louisville team, and I always want to stay away from bad coaching, and it's kind of what it is. With Louisville, you still have some really bad coaching. It feels like it's still a pretty undisciplined team as well. 13 turnovers per game for a mid-tempo team that doesn't have great shot selection, shooting about 28.5% from 3-point range. And among all of your players that have made at least one 3-pointer thus far this year, you've got one guy that is shooting above 31.3% from 3-point range. That'd be J.J. Traynor, has been able to give you 10 points per game. Now, what I will say is that down low, there's going to be a nice advantage to be had for Louisville. I like what Brandon Huntley-Hatfield has been able to do in the post. He's been able to give you about 8.5 rebounds per game, so that's been rock solid. And Sky Clark is able to give you 17 points per game, but he's a big reason why the turnover numbers have been so high for Louisville. Meanwhile, you've got an Arkansas State team that, they play super duper fast with their 13.8 turnovers per game, but it does feel like they've got a little bit more pop in the backcourt. Taron Todd, DeAndre Dominguez have led the way with a combined 26 points per game. Dominguez at 6'9" is able to shoot about 33% from 3. Actually shot north of 30% 37% while he was at UMass last season. He's able to give you about 8.5 rebounds per game, and it is going to be a little bit tough for the team to match up with Huntley Hatfield, but Isaiah Nelson at 6'10", he's got some good size. I think that he's going to be given that responsibility, and I think that he's going to do a fine job of being able to do so. Freddie Hicks, the top scorer over at Tarleton State, has been able to give you some double-figure numbers as well, and then Caleb Fields was dealing with a little bit of an injury towards the back half of November. He returned in that game against UAB, had 9 points, 7 assists to just 1 turnover per game, and he might be the most efficient guard out there on the floor. Last season, he had 4.5 assists to 2.5 turnovers per game, and while his assist numbers this year are down, he's only turned the ball over about 1.9 times per contest, and you do have a pair of defenses that they certainly are leaving something to be desired. In terms of this Arkansas State team and points allowed on a per possession basis, they're clocking in 284th in all of college basketball, and for Louisville, it's better. It's not a whole heck of a lot better, though, 182nd as well. So I do think that Arkansas State, with all their athletes, are going to be able to hold in there. I did set my total at a 153. We've seen Arkansas State play a whole bunch of unders, but I do think that because the under has hit so much, that it's now giving you some very favorable numbers on their overs, as Arkansas State is still looking to play quite a bit up-tempo. Recognize that Louisville has been a little bit all over the place with regards to their offense, but going to be willing to go over in the spot, and anything north of 3, taking the points with Arkansas State. 635, 636 on the betting board. Old Liberty Bibberty is going to be playing us to Tennessee State. Tennessee State, a 13.5 to a 14-point underdog. Totals between 140 and 141. I said Liberty as a 14-point favorite. At 13.5 and not a half a point more, I am going to be willing to lay it with Liberty. It's a Liberty squad that just relies so much on versatility and overall efficiency, as Liberty, they play at one of the bottom 50 paces in terms of total possessions per game in all of college basketball, but this squad just does a really good job of being able to find open looks for everyone. They've done a nice job of being able to replace Darius McGee, one of the top scorers in all of college basketball last year, by committee, as right now you've got 5 different guys that give you between 9.6 and 13.9 points per game. Point forward Kyle Rode has been really your main guy with 14 points, 4.5 boards, 2.5 assists per contest on 39% three-point shooting. And then Caden Menefee, he's been able to shoot north of 40% from three-point range. He's been able to do a pretty tremendous job in his own right. But I do think that for Liberty, I think the biggest thing for them is just finding a little bit more rebounding outside. Joseph Van Zandt, who's been more of that designated man on the glass, been able to give you 8 boards compared to 5.5 points per game. You've only got one other guy that gives you a north of 4.6 rebounds per game. And for Tennessee State, this team is one that has been giving up quite a bit on the defensive side of things, but I do like what this team is able to offer in terms of their backcourt. They did a nice job of bringing in some guys from within the OVC, at the very least. They were playing there a few years ago in the case of E.J. Bellinger over at Belmont, to be able to help fortify things as well. Keenan Hodges was the top scorer over at Eastern Illinois a season ago. He's been a little bit of a do-it-all player with 11 points, not really tall, but still is able to give you about 5 boards per contest, 1.8 steals per game, and you do have 3 separate players for the Tennessee State team that are able to generate at least 1.5 steals per game. They are a team that's certainly going to gamble for some turnovers, as they're getting a little bit cash from the outside. It's a Tennessee State team that ranks right around about 200th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, with opponents currently shooting north of 35% from three-point range against them. So I do think that that's going to be a little bit of an Achilles heel against this Liberty team, and it is a Tennessee State squad that they are not shy of going a little bit more up-tempo as well. So you are going to have a little bit of a war between a team in Liberty that is looking to play slow, controlled, and efficient, and a Tennessee State team that's more around about 125th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. So, interesting spot here with Liberty. I'm going to lay up to 13.5 with them. I was alluding to it. Tennessee State does not do a great job of being able to guard the arc, and because they are very vulnerable from the outside, I do think that that's going to lead to a bit of a higher scoring game. So, set my total at a 144, looking at the overhand, with Liberty willing to lay up to 13.5 with them. 637, 638 on the betting board. BYU plays us at Denver, and the Pioneers are a 25-point underdog with your total at 158, and I set BYU as a 26.5 point favorite. Don't want to be laying much more than the 25 that I'm seeing right now, but I am going to be willing to lay it. It's a BYU team that really is checking all the boxes. This team is a top 25 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis when it comes to their actual scoring. This team is a top 10 team in the nation in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, as they shoot as a collective 37.5% from 3. An up-tempo team with only about 10.3 turnovers per contest, and you've gotten some really good facilitation out of Spencer Johnson. 4.5 assists, 5.5 boards, nearly 12 points per game, and BYU does just such a really good job of being able to rebound by committee, as out of their top 6 scorers, you've got 5 of them giving you at least 4.4 rebounds per game. Now, they have been dealing with a little bit of an injury to Fusani Trayer. He's been out of the fold for each of the last 3 games. I expect him to be out once again. Should not really affect them in this game against Denver. Now, Denver does have a Sanford transfer, and Tuki Tanamo, who's been able to do actually a pretty tremendous job down low, slugging about 18 points, 8.5 boards per game. And then you got Tommy Bruner shooting about 46% from 3-point range. But talk about a defense that is not going to be able to hold up here. Denver has been one of the most putrid in all of college basketball in terms of that category. It's Denver 306th in the nation in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, going up against a BYU defense that is 4th. And for BYU, currently at home, they're allowing 74.9 points per 100 possessions. So even though Bruner comes in as one of the nation's top scorers with 24 points per game, I think that there's a good chance that he's going to be getting neutralized. Jackson Brenchley, he comes in from Utah, so he's very familiar with BYU. 3 assists, 9 points per game. He's been able to do a nice job of being able to give you a little bit of versatility, but with BYU, you've got such good athletes on this team. It's a BYU team that they themselves have given up 56 points or fewer 3 out of their last 5 games, while being absolutely insane on offense, while Denver has been able to do an incredible job with their offense as well, including putting up 80 points against Colorado State. I do think that this is a little bit of a different animal. I do think that BYU certainly going to be taking it to Denver. I think that Denver going to be able to get a few points out of Tommy Bruner still to be able to hit this over. I set my total at a 160.5, but I just think that this Denver defense going to get completely dominated by a BYU team that right now looks like one of the most efficient in the country. Willing to lay up to 26 with BYU. Set my total at a 160.5. So also looking at the over 639, 640 on the betting board. UNLV is going to be technically playing against Creighton. This is going to be a game that they're going to be playing at the Dollar Loan Center. It's still in the area of Las Vegas, technically Henderson, but UNLV finds themselves in their home state, a 14 to 14.5 point underdog. Total on this game is between 148.5 and 149.5. And if this were a true neutral court game that was being played out there in like Ypsilanti, Michigan or something like that, sure, I'd be willing to set Creighton more around a 14 to a 14.5, but I had to set this line closer to 12 just because I do think that UNLV going to be able to get some home support. We know what they have all went through just as a university over the last week or so, and I commend all the gentlemen that have handled themselves so well in such a trying time. But with regards to what you're actually going to get on the court, I do think that UNLV going to be able to hold up against a Creighton team that they're really not a fast team, but they're just so stinking efficient. Like with Creighton, they're outside the top 225 in terms of total possessions per game. This is not a team that's looking to run it and gun it by any stretch of the imagination. They just hit shots. Creighton, number 3 in all of college basketball in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Now, this comes with a little bit of a caveat in that they are averaging about 27 points fewer per 100 possessions on the road rather than at home. Now, they're still really efficient on the road because they're just that good at home, but still, I do think that that's going to be a little bit of an issue for them going up against a UNLV team that, under the Kruger regime, I do think that they're going to be able to turn over a little bit of a new leaf with their defense. Last year, they were gambling for turnovers, and sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. Now things are a little bit more in control. They're about 294th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So that has been pretty ghastly for them, but I do think that you've got the pieces for things to be a little bit better. You bring in someone like a Caleb Boone, who was over at Oklahoma State to begin his career, to be able to give you 14 points, 5 boards, has been throughout his career a little bit more of a defense-oriented guy. It is a UNLV team that they turn the ball over 10.5 times per game. They shoot about 33.5% from 3-point range, and they do a nice job of being a rebound by committee. You've been able to have Luis Rodriguez give you about 11.5 points, 6 boards per contest, and Jalen Hill chips in there 11.5 points, right around 6.8 rebounds per game himself. But with Hill, he's been dealing with a little bit of an injury as he's been out of the fold. Caleb Boone has been returning to his full self, and you saw Isaiah Cottrell, a little bit more of a defensive stopper that comes over from West Virginia, who's been able to do a nice job hitting the glass as well for this Creighton bunch. They do a nice job in terms of just having their star players be stars, as each of their top 3 scorers give you at least 15 points and 6.4 rebounds per game. Ryan Kalkbrenner at 7 feet tall is able to give you 2 blocks on 37.5% three-point shooting. Baylor Shireman shooting 38.5% from 3, and Creighton as a whole, they're shooting 40% from 3. And typically when you see those sorts of numbers, you think that it's going to be bogged down a little bit, but I don't think that that's going to be the case with this squad. We are noticing that UNLV is trying to slow things down as well. This is a UNLV team that, in terms of total possessions per game, they're right now in the neighborhood about 294. So it's going to be a low possession game. Whether or not you hit the over all comes down to efficiency, and with the way that UNLV has been playing defense, I certainly do think that there's going to be a high amount of efficiency for Creighton, but I do think that UNLV is going to be able to get some points up on the board themselves. Now, I fully recognize that this is a Creighton team that's allowed 70 points or fewer in each of their last 5 games, but for UNLV, they have gotten to at least 72 points in 4 of their last 5 as well, so I do think that they do their part with this total and hold within this number. I did set UNLV as a 12-point underdog, so I'm going to be willing to take the points and set my total at 152, so also looking over 641, 642 on the betting board. Utah State is a red face-off against Santa Clara, and Santa Clara is an underdog of 3.5 to 4 points on their own floor. 150.5 to 151.5 is your total, and when it comes to the Broncos of Santa Clara, I did set them as a 5-point underdog, so this is a spot where I'm going to be willing to lay it with Utah State. I've just become more and more impressed by Utah State as the season has went along. I was a little bit skeptical of this team to begin the season. I do think that we're still going to see a little bit of regression out of Great Osabor, because Osabor was a solid player when he was over at Montana State last season. He was able to log for the team in the neighborhood of something like 9 points, 5 boards. He's up to 19.5 points, 9 boards, 2.5 assists, and is shooting 50% from 3-point range. It's just absolutely ridiculous what we've been seeing there. And then you've got Ian Martinez, who has come over from Maryland, where he was a tremendous shooter. Hasn't really shot too well this year, but he's still logging about 10 points per contest. It's just a team that in general has been very efficient, and a big reason why is their point guard in Darius Brown. Darius Brown came over along with Danny Sprinkle to Utah State, and he's got 8 assists to 1.1 turnovers per game. He doesn't necessarily score at will. He's only giving you about 9.5 points per game, but when he does shoot, it goes in. He's shooting about 40% from 3-point range. This Utah State team is just executing the little things so well right now. It is a Utah State team that they themselves are allowing opponents to only shoot about 28% from 3-point range as well. So while they're shooting it well from 3-point range, they're also guarding the arc really well. Now, the question is, are they going to be able to hold up with that size that you've got for Santa Clara? Because you've got a 7-footer in Christoph Tilley, who's done a solid job of really helping this team out in a wide variety of ways. 9 points, 4.5 boards, right around about 2 blocks per contest. And then when it comes to just overall size, Santa Clara has someone in 6'8" Adama Ball, shooting about 37.5% from 3-point range, chips in their 4 boards, 3 assists, 14.5 points per game. And then Carlos Marshall at 6'6", been one of the best 3-point shooters in all of college basketball thus far this season, shooting 48.5% from 3-point range. Tyree Bryant also shoots in the neighborhood about 44% from the outside as well. And then you've got Johnny O'Neal, who a season ago when he was over at American was north of a 40% 3-point shooter. Has only been able to shoot about 29% thus far this season, but still giving you about 7.5 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. So there's a lot of versatility. There's a lot of size for this Utah State team to match up with, but I think that they're going to be able to do so very well with Santa Clara. They do get loose with the ball with about 13.5 turnovers per game. They don't force a lot of turnovers themselves, and with Santa Clara being outside the top 150 in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, I think that that's going to work in the favor of Utah State, who I think is going to be flat out more efficient in this game. So it is a circumstance where I'm going to be willing to lay up to 4.5 with Utah State, and did set my total at 147 as well. So here at a 150.5, 151.5, I do think that Utah State, a relatively mid-tempo team, going to be able to rise up with that defense. I do think that Santa Clara, with their size, holds Utah State to a lot of one-and-done opportunities. So diving in on the under and going to be willing to lay the number with Utah State. 643, 644 on the betting board. Nevada is going to be playing us with Weber State, and Weber State is a underdog of 9.5 to 10 points with a total of between 132.5 and 133.5. And with Nevada, I did set them as a favorite of 12.5 points. So you're at 9.5 to 10. I'm going to be willing to lay this number. It's a Weber State team that very much is reliant upon their top scorers. They have gotten absolutely amazing results all season long from Dylan Jones, who's been able to register a double-double. He's giving you 20-plus points. He's giving you right around about 10 or so boards per contest. He just needs a little bit of help from his friends. He's been able to get a little bit of that from Steve Verplanken. Verplanken last season registered about 13 points, was shooting in the neighborhood about 40% from 3-point range, and thus far this season, 37% shooting from the outside with 12.5 points per game. But outside of that, you really don't have anyone else on this Weber State team giving you north of about 4.5 boards or 8 points per game. And then on the flip side for Nevada, this team has just been all sorts of efficient, really on both the offensive and defensive sides of things. Now, for Nevada. They did get handled in their last game against Drake. That was a little bit of a wake-up call for them, but impressive wins against the likes of Loyola Marymount. They were able to go on the road. They knocked off Washington. That does tell me a lot about this team that is one of the best in all of college basketball, being able to hold up on the defensive side of things. For Nevada, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they're still clocking in 20th in the country. This is a top 50 team with regards to their offensive efficiency as well, despite the fact that they did have that pretty almighty clunker against Drake, to say the least. But for Nevada, even though this is not a team that is really going to be super duper hot from three-point range, they just do the little things well. Last year, they were one of the top free throw shooting teams in all of college basketball, with some of the fewest turnovers per possession in the game, and they've been doing that once again this year. 9.5 turnovers, shooting 74% at the free throw line, despite shooting just 32% from three-point range. And 6'6" combo player Keenan Blackshear is a big reason why. 16 points, 4.5 assists. He has not made a single three thus far this season. You look to more like Hunter McIntosh, who's shooting 37.5% from the outside, to be able to do that. And it's a Nevada team that's done a nice job with their 8-man rotation, knowing who to be able to go to in terms of being able to get a little bit of rebounding, like a Nick Davidson, who was able to give you about 6.5 boards per contest. And with Weber State being such a top-heavy team, now it is a team that does an amazing job of being able to slow things down. For Weber State, they are outside of the top 315 in terms of total possessions per game. And take a look at them in terms of their overall defensive efficiency and points allowed on a per possession basis. Weber State 37th in the country, but Weber State also allowing 20.5 points more per 100 possessions when they are on the road rather than when they are at home. So this is a spot where I set my total at a 135.5. I do think that Nevada going to be able to pull away. I do think that they execute their good offense coming off of that rough performance against Drake. So going to be taking a look at the over, and with Nevada, want to lay up to 12 with them. This last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before we hit the extra game. 645, 646 on the board. It is San Francisco, and they play us to Seattle. Seattle does find themselves as an underdog of 9.5 points, and their total on this game is aimed between 134.5 and 135. And with Seattle, I did set them as an underdog of 8 points, so I'm going to be willing to take the 9.5. You've got a Seattle squad that has been very much up and down this year, but I do think that Cam Tyson, their top scorer over the last few years, is going to be able to rise up in this spot. It's been a bit of an uneven year for him. After a season ago, he was able to put up 20-plus points per contest thus far this season. He actually hasn't been as efficient, with more like 17.5 points per game, but still shooting about 38% from three-point range. He has gotten a little bit more help from his friends, though. You've got Kobe Williamson, Brandon Chatfield, guys with size, both give you about 5.5 boards per contest. Between the two of them, you've been able to get about 3 steals per game. And for San Francisco, this is a relatively slow and controlled team that has looked to Jonathan Mogbo to really be able to man things down low. He's done an incredible job with 15 points and right around 9.5 rebounds per game. But the thing that does have trepidation with me about San Francisco is that they do turn the ball over about 13.5 times per game. Now, Mongolian Mike, he's a good three-point shooter at 6'8", that's able to give you 4+ assists per game. That is going to be incredibly hard to guard. I love his overall game, and you've got other guys like Isaiah Hawthorne, Vladimir Morkovsky. They really don't see a lot of minutes that provide a lot of size as well. I don't understand why San Francisco doesn't go a little bit deeper into their bench. They are 275th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, so they do like to slow things down. But time and time again with Seattle, this is a team that consistently ranks in about the top 75 or so in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They've been a little bit up and down with their defense this season, but it's really kicked into high gear recently. They're currently 33rd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I do think that Seattle going to be able to slow things down. Marcus Williams gets a little bit loose with the ball to be able to hold in there, and I think that the reason why this game goes over actually is due to late game fouling. I did set my total at 136. You've got a San Francisco team that shoots relatively okay from three-point range, and with Seattle, their defense is not really predicated on turnovers. It's playing good, tough man-to-man defense, so I do think that this game is close enough for some late game fouling. I think that Cam Tyson going to be able to bust out a little bit more, so did make my total 136, looking at the over, and with Seattle, won't take anything north of 8 with them. Now we hit the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
306-529, 306-530, Incarnate Word is on the road facing off against Rice. We give our own to Lane Kiffin. Go Elbow says Rice is between an 11.5 and a 12-point favorite. Total is between 156.5 and 158, and with Rice, I did set them as a 12.5 point favorite. I am going to be willing to lay this number. You've got a pair of teams that have been outside the top 250 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, so certainly defense is not going to be at a premium in this one, but for Rice, I just think that the versatility of Max Fiedler is going to be too much for Incarnate Word to be able to match up with. Fiedler is someone that stands right around 6'10", and he affects the game in so many different ways, logging about 9 points, 8.5 boards, 5 assists per game. Not a versatile guy that pops threes or anything like that, but just helps flow the offense in general. So remember two games ago against Houston Christian, he had just 2 points, but 10 assists and 12 rebounds. Like, those are the sorts of performances that he's capable of having. He had a little bit of a clunker in the team's most recent game against Houston, but a lot of guys are going to have that. Meanwhile, for Rice, I do think that they're going to get a little bit more moving forward out of Travis Evie from the outside, who's shooting just 30.5% from three-point range. You take a look at him for his career, and he's a career more like 36.5% three-point shooter. We've been able to have Makai Mason really step up in his sort of struggle with about 12.5 points per game, but he himself shoots about 28.5% from three-point range this season after he's been much better throughout his career. And for Incarnate Word, just been the Skywick show. 20 points, 7 boards, shooting 36% from three-point range. But with Incarnate Word, this is one of the worst teams at being able to take care of the ball in all of college basketball. They have been turning it over right around about 16 times per contest. Really, other than Wicks, you don't have a ton down low as well. You do have Sean Robinson, the transfer from Austin Peay, give you 12 points and 6.5 rebounds per game. But for both of these teams, defense has really not been their forte. Both of these teams have given up at least 74 points in 3 out of their last 4 games. So I do think that you get an up and down game, especially with Rice year in and year out being one of the most up-tempo teams in all of college basketball. Incarnate Word has cranked up their tempo to be a top 75 team in terms of total possessions per game as well. So this is an ordeal where I did set my line at 12.5. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 12 with Rice, and maybe my total 158.5. So looking at the over and looking at Rice laying the big number, 306-531, 306-532. Stony Brook is going to be playing us in Norfolk State. Norfolk State is an underdog of a point to a point and a half. 139 to 140 is your total, and with Stony Brook, I did set them as a favorite of 2 points. So at the 1, I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Don't want to be going much north of 1, but I am going to be willing to lay the 1 because you do have a Norfolk State team that when they've made their runs to the NCAA tournament, typically it's been predicated on really good defense. And for Norfolk State, it looks like they might be a little bit more back. They have given up fewer than 70 points in now 4 out of their last 5 games. But if you take a look at the overall efficiency numbers of Norfolk State, it really doesn't match up with what you've seen over the last few games. As in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they're still right around 133rd in all of college basketball. And it's a Stony Brook team that certainly has been having their doldrum period as well with regards to defense. As for Stony Brook, they're about 232nd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but they have been significantly better when they have been at home, giving up nearly 30 points fewer per 100 possessions at home rather than on the road. And for Stony Brook, they've been able to rise up a little bit more as well, as they've now given up 63 points or fewer in 3 out of their last 5 games. A lot of this for both of these teams has been a little bit of a product of just circumstance. With Norfolk State, you do have a UNC Wilmington transfer in Jamari Thomas, who's done a tremendous job with 19 points, 2.5 steals per game, shooting about 40.5% from three-point range for a Norfolk State team that really doesn't turn the ball over a lot, but they just don't have a lot of size. Only has one player giving you north of 4 rebounds per game in Jelani Darden, who only stands right around 6'5". Meanwhile, even though Keenan Fitzmaurice is not necessarily a super willing rebounder, he is a 7-footer that's able to give you some stretchability. He's able to pop some threes. Andre Snoddy has been able to do a nice job coming in from Central Connecticut with about 6.5 rebounds per game. He's been a little bit in and out of the fold and hasn't necessarily been tremendous on the offensive side of things, but all they really need him to do is rebound, because now for Stony Brook, you've got reinforcements in the backcourt with Aaron Clark, Dean Knoll coming off of injuries from a season ago with Clark. He has been a little bit banged up recently, as well as been able to log about 10.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. Meanwhile, Knoll, he's been able to shoot 40% from three-point range as far as the season for a Stony Brook team that has only turned the ball over 11 times per game. Neither of these teams are super duper up-tempo, and we have seen a little bit of a renaissance for both of these defenses. So I did set my total 136. I'm diving in on the under, and I do think that the lack of size is going to be costly for Norfolk State. Willing to lay the 1 with Stony Brook and taking a look at the under. 306-533, 306-534. It is Boston U, and they're to face off against Dartmouth. Dartmouth is a slight favorite here, finding them in the neighborhood about 2.5 to 3 points, and on this game, you're going to be getting it at 127.5 to 129, and with Dartmouth, they open up as 2-point favorites, so we've seen this number tick up a little bit, and I wholeheartedly agree with it. I said Dartmouth as a 6.5-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it. You've got a Boston U team that is just not the same team that they have been in past years. The likes of Walter White and company were Breaking Bad, and now they're just bad because they lose each other top 5 scorers. from a season ago. You don't have a single guy that's averaging at least 10 points per game this season for Boston U, as right now your main headline guy is Tyrone Alexander, who's been able to give you about 9 points per contest, along with Miles Brewster. And for Boston U, that's compounded by the fact that they don't have a single guy that's really giving you north of 6 rebounds per game. Even though Dartmouth doesn't necessarily have the world's greatest rebounders, they do have a little bit of size. Someone like Dusan Niskovich is 6'8", only gives you about 4.5 boards per contest, but has stretchability, has been able to log about 17.5 points per game with 13 plus in each of the team's last 4 games. Now, Dartmouth needs to cut down on turnovers, and Niskovich specifically has been turning the ball over about 2.7 times per contest. And for Dartmouth, I do have to believe that they're going to shoot a little bit better than 26.5% from three-point range moving forward. There has been one thing that has been semi-okay for Boston U. It's that they haven't been getting completely cooked on defense. It's not great with their defense, but they're 126th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Meanwhile, Dartmouth has been a little bit all over the place with ranking about 235th with this regard. But I just don't know who on this Boston U team is going to be able to execute offensively to be able to take advantage of that. You've been able to get about 8.5 points, 5 boards out of Ethan Owusawa. He's about 6'2", comes in and has been able to do an okay job for the team, shooting about 36.5% from three-point range. But Boston U is one of the more low-tempo teams in all of college basketball, turning it over a little bit over 12 times per contest and shooting about 41% from the floor. And I do think that the versatility that you get with Brandon Mitchell-Day, 12 points, 6 boards, he's able to pop threes. Has not necessarily done so very well, but has logged a double-double in each of the last 2 games for Dartmouth. Going to be able to win out in the spot. I think that Dartmouth is going to be able to get a little bit more as well from Ryan Cornish, who last season he was a solid scorer, 12.5 points, 2.5 assists per game. He's only given the team 5.5 points per game, but I have to think that he was dealing with an injury or something, because in his last 2 games has looked much better. 14 points in each of them, so a combined 28 points the last 2 games. That's more of the Ryan Cornish that we all know and love, and his emergence has been a little bit more bullish on Dartmouth. So I did set Dartmouth as a 6.5 point favorite. I'm willing to lay up to 6 with them, and quite frankly, I think both of these teams are going to have a tough time with their offense all season long. Set my total at a 126.5, so going under to go along with Dartmouth laying the number. 3 of 6.535, 3 of 6.536. Queens NC is going to be playing us to Appalachian State. App State is a favorite of between 6 and 7 points. That was between 149 and 151 with Queens. I did set them as an underdog of just 1.5 points. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Appalachian State. It's a squad that certainly has had their triumphs at home. On the road, it's a little bit of a different story. With Appalachian State, they are looking to calm things down. They're looking to slow things up with Donovan Gregory being your main guy with 13 points, 3 assists, 4.5 boards, and he's been remarkably shooting about 40% from three-point range as far this season. Now, Appalachian State, they've only played 1 game ever since their triumph over Auburn, and that was against, I believe, the old Central Bend. I don't know what their mascot is, but old Central Bend. And Appalachian State, they're a team that shoots about 33.5% from 3. They do a nice job of doing the little things. They only turn the ball over about 10.5 times per game, but I think that they're going to have a little bit of a tough time with all the versatility that you've got with Queens NC. You've got a pair of guys that are able to combine for in the neighborhood about 32 points per game, with AJ McKee logging 17 points, 5 boards, Dayton Albury being able to give you about 15 points, 5.5 boards. Both of these guys have been struggling a little bit with their three-point shooting, but Queens also takes care of the ball. They've got a few more turnovers per game at 12, but they also play at a significantly more up-tempo pace with Albury. He also gives you about 4.5 assists per game. It's a Queens NC team that certainly is not quite on par with Appalachian State with regards to their defense. Appalachian State, 71st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis, and typically that is their calling card. Meanwhile, you've got a Queens NC team that is ranking outside the top 200 in terms of points scored on a per-possession basis, but I know that we had this man on the show, Nick Lawrenson, who's a part of that Queens NC team, and I remember him talking about Queens NC right now undefeated at home, completely defeated on the road. And I do think that the home court advantage is going to be very meaningful, because with this Queens NC team, they just have been a vastly different team in terms of both their offensive and defensive efficiency when they've been at home rather than when they've been on the road, more specifically with regards to the offense, because the defense, it's been relatively a constant. It's been lackluster well outside the top 200 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. But you look at the way that this Queens NC team has been able to execute at home, they're averaging 20.4 points more per per 100 possessions when they are at home rather than on the road, and I do think that that's going to keep them lively in this game. I do think that Queens is going to drop their first game of the season at home because I do think that Appalachian State gets a little bit more of their slow, grimy style. It's an Appalachian State team that's allowed 64 points or fewer in each of their last 5 games, but I do think that Queens has the guards to be able to match up and be able to hold in this game. So I do think that with the likes of CJ Huntley and company being able to do a solid job down low, Appalachian State is able to get it done, and I do have to point out as well, Justin Abson. I mean, this guy is giving you 3 blocks per contest for Appalachian State. I think that that's going to cause for a low-scoring slog, so my total 145.5, so diving in on the under, but we'll take the home underdog, Queens NC, with getting 6 points, set them as a 1.5 point underdog. 306-537, 306-538. Charleston Southern is playing us in North Alabama. North Alabama is a 6 to a 6.5 point favorite, and your total is between 141 and 143. I did set Charleston Southern as an underdog of 3 points, so getting 6, I'm going to be willing to take another shot here on a home underdog. North Alabama is a better shooting team in this one, and with North Alabama, they don't necessarily have a ton down low, but they've got 1 or 2 pieces that do a really nice job of being able to hit the glass. You've been able to have Mr. Devontae Forrest be able to give you 7+ rebounds per game. He's really been the main guy for this team. Meanwhile, you got a Charleston Southern team that has Tajay Kelly. He's been able to do a solid job the last 2 years. He's been able to log the last 2 years in the neighborhood about 7 to 8 rebounds per game. I do think that he's going to have a little bit of a tough time against Forrest, but the big thing for North Alabama is they just get completely cooked on defense while they themselves have been cooking up teams with regards to their shooting. Among your top 5 players that have made at least 1 3 for North Alabama, they're all shooting at least 35.5% from 3-point range, with KJ Johnson being that main headline scorer, logging about 14.5 points per game. But the problem is, for KJ Johnson, he's right now dealing with a little bit of an injury, and that means that they've had to rely a lot on Jakari Lane, who's been a nice floor general for the team. 4.5 assists per game. He's been playing on the ball a lot more, so he's seen a little bit of a dip in terms of his overall shooting efficiency, but all in all, has been able to do a nice job for a team that still has a nice sharpshooter in Will Sosey, who's right now shooting 55% from 3. He's a really good shooter. I don't think he's that good of a shooter, but you take a look at North Alabama, and what has been a little bit more glaring with this team is that ever since KJ Johnson has went out of the fold, they've been giving up about 7 points more per 100 possessions when he's been off the floor, and that should be able to help out a Charleston Southern team that has a nice score of their own in RJ Johnson. I know that there was a little bit of question mark as to whether or not he was going to be playing over the weekend. He went out there, he was able to put up their 21 big points, so I love what I'm seeing out of him. You've got a Charleston Southern team that overall, they do shoot 35% from 3-point range. Their big bugaboo has been the fact that they do turn the ball over 14.5 times per game, but neither of these teams really do a good job of generating turnovers. Charleston Southern, certainly the lesser of the two. They're only getting about 4 steals per game, and it is a little bit of a top-heavy Charleston Southern team, but I do think that you're going to get a little bit more moving forward out of Reginald Duhart Jr. He's someone that came in from Appalachian State, was a little bit more of just a mix-and-match sort of guy, and he's become a career about 41.5% 3-point shooter at 6'9", that specializes a little bit more in being able to hit the glass, and with this North Alabama team being a little bit banged up, I do think that it's a prime time for a Charleston Southern team that has been rough with their offense. 66 points or fewer in 4 of their last 5 games to be able to hold in this affair. It's a good old situation of something's got to give. North Alabama, one of the top teams in all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game. Charleston Southern has had a tough time executing on offense, but I do think that North Alabama defense is going to be a little bit lax, and I do think that North Alabama hits their shot. So I did set my total at 147. I'm going to be taking a look at the over, and with North Alabama, I set them as a 3-point favorite. So take the points and the over. 306-539, 306-540. UW Milwaukee plays us to Longwood. Longwood is a road favorite of 3 points, and your total is between 145.5 and 146. With Longwood, I set them as a 4.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay this number. It's a UW Milwaukee team that has just been all sorts of banged up this year. When you've got your top scorer in B.J. Freeman deal with an injury, you know that's not really going well for your team, and that makes the top scorer one Mr. Eric Pratt, who's been able to give you 8.5 points per game. That is not a situation where you want to be. You want to be checking in on B.J. Freeman's status, as he could be returning on any given day. I don't think he should be good to go in this one, and even if he is, he's probably not going to be fully 100%, and that's just rough for a Milwaukee team because he leads the team in terms of points per game, rebounds per game, assists per game, and steals per game. So, yeah, that's rough, and he's also shooting 37.5% from 3-point range. The only other person that's shooting north of 37.5% from the outside, Angela Stewart, who gives you about 6 points per contest. So, that's not a good situation to say the least. So, one thing UW Milwaukee has been able to do without him, they still are taking care of the ball, but just resulted in some, shall we say, hit or miss offense. That's the best way of putting it. And they go up against a Longwood team that certainly is not going to light it up from the outside. This is a below average 3-point shooting team, but Where Longwood really excels is on the defensive side of things. How about 17th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis? And in road/neutral court games, they are number 4 in all of college basketball. That is just absolutely incredible. Jonathan Massey comes in from McNeese, 12 points, 5.5 boards, shooting 36% from three-point range. It has been Christmas for the team as Michael Christmas. He also has made a total over 8 rebounds per game. Simon Zappala, 7-footer from Utah State. He gives you 6 rebounds per game. This is just way too much size for UW Milwaukee to overcome. And while Waylon Napper, not a guy that's going to light it up from the outside. He comes in from Southern Miss, a career less than 25% three-point shooter, but 4.4 assists and 2.5 turnovers per game. He forces nearly 2 steals per game, does a tremendous job on the defensive side of things. He gives Longwood exactly what they need to be this really good, stout defensive team. Has allowed 61 points or fewer in each of their last 5 games. Now, to the credit of UW Milwaukee, they have gotten past the 70-point plateau in each of their last 2 games, but I think that this is where the absence of Freeman really shows up, and I think that UW Milwaukee gets stonewalled. I set my total at a 140.5. I think Longwood holds up defensively, so I'm diving in on the under, and I'm willing to lay up to 4 with Longwood. 306-541, 306-542. LSU plays us at Alabama State. Alabama State, a 20.5 point underdog. 143.5 to 144.5 is your total. I did set my total at a 149. I'm going to be going on the over because got an Alabama State team that is looking to play at a very up-tempo style. 20th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. LSU has been more of a mid-tempo team, right around 205th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but for Alabama State, they are going to be able to do a nice job of being able to execute a little bit of offense here against an LSU team that has been having a tough time down low, but in the end, I do think that for Alabama State, this is going to be a squad where they themselves have their defensive woes really pop up as out of your 363 Division I teams, Alabama State right now clocking in 272nd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, really giving it up from the outside as Alabama State, they themselves are only shooting about 39% from the floor. Now, the good news for Alabama State, they play super duper up-tempo, and they're only turning the ball over about 11 times per game. It's TJ Medlock has been able to do a very solid job of being able to dole out the ball with about 2.5 assists, 16 points, 5 rebounds. He's been the do-it-all guy for this team, but he just needs a little bit more support. You have to be able to have someone in KJ Hines be able to take the load off a little bit with Hines. He has been able to give you about 12.5 points, leads the team with 4 assists per game, but you really don't have tremendous shooting in general for the team. It actually feels like they're a little bit more efficient from the outside than inside, as you have someone like an Isaiah Range shooting about 35.5% from 3, was dealing with injury towards the beginning part of the season. He's been able to come back and has been solid. You've got a 38% three-point shooter in Kendall Parker, but they just don't have anything to match up with the likes of Will Baker, Jalen Reed down low. As for Alabama State, nobody's giving you north of 5.1 rebounds per game, and typically LSU gets a little bit exposed down low, and on top of that, with LSU, they do generate about 10 steals per game. What has been unfortunate for this LSU team is that they were expecting Jalen Cook to be their main point guard. He has not been out there, so they have been without a point guard. I mean, Jordan Wright has had a little bit of a hand in trying to be able to dole out the ball along with Trey Hannibal. They both give you 1.8 assists per game, and they're both leading the way in terms of assists per game. But Will Baker, the 7-footer, shooting 40% from three-point range is absolutely massive. Again, this is an Alabama State team that, with them not being able to generate turnovers, that Achilles heel that LSU has, it's not going to be exposed. I do think that's going to lead to a high up-tempo, up-and-down game. So I did set my total at 149. I'm going to be taking a look at the over with LSU. Set them as a 21-point favorite, so 20.5 is the max I'm willing to lay, but willing to lay with LSU to go along. The over, 306-543, 306-544. McNeese is going to be playing us to Southern Miss, and Southern Miss is 5.5 to a 6.5 point underdog, with your total between 141.5 and 139. With McNeese, this has been one of the slowest tempo teams in all of college basketball. I recognize that they have been pretty darn efficient on the offensive side of things, but I'm going to be taking a look at the under. McNeese, out of 362 Division I teams, 355th in terms of total possessions per game, and it's not like they're playing against some sort of a blazer in Southern Miss either. Southern Miss, right now about 295th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and so much of gauging totals is just taking a look at the tempo of the game itself, and I do think that you're going to get a low and slow game when it comes to this McNeese squad. They've been able to do a really nice job with all their transfers really working in tandem. Shahada Wells is able to give you 16 plus points per contest. I remember when he was over at UT Arlington a few seasons ago. He was really able to fire on all cylinders. He's doing that once again this season, and they go up against a Southern Miss team that you could tell that they're just a far cry from what they were 8 seasons ago. They had really good versatility when they had Felipe Haas out there. Now that he's out of the fold, they're really having a mix and match in terms of rebounding. Now, credit where credit is due. Everyone on this team is a very willing rebounder. Out of their top 7 scorers, 6 of them have been able to give you at least 4 rebounds per game. Only one of these guys is giving you north of 5 rebounds per game, and that'd be Victor Hart. He's been able to do a solid job down low, giving you about 6 rebounds per game, but for Southern Miss, they just aren't doing as great of a job from the outside as they did a season ago as well, shooting about 32% from 3-point range, as feels like a little bit too much has been thrown on the plate of he and Donovan Ivory out in the backcourt. These two guys have been able to combine for just under 29 points per game, and Ivory shooting about 40% from 3-point range, but a Southern Miss defense that was very stout a season ago, it has been having its shortfalls for Southern Miss in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. This team is well outside the top 200 as of right now. Meanwhile, for McNeese, they've been more of a league average team in terms of their overall defense. They're coming off of giving up 23 points in their last game. That came against a non-Division I foe. But if you look at their games against actual Division I teams, they have allowed north of 71 points just once thus far this season. So they've been able to do a solid job holding up on the defensive side of things. For McNeese, you've got Christian Schulmate, who's been able to give you about 9.5 rebounds per game. He should be the best rebounder in this game. You've got a plethora of good shooting from the outside as out of your top 5 scorers. 4 of them are shooting at least 39% from 3. I think that there's going to be a little bit of regression there, and I do think that Southern Miss plays a little bit better defensively than what they have towards the beginning part of the season, channeling what they did a season ago. But I did set my total at 132. I'm going to be diving in on the under. Now with McNeese, I do think that they get the job done. I'm going to be willing to lay this number to go along with this total under 306.545, 306.546. Northwestern plays us to Chicago State. Chicago State, a 24 to a 24.5 point underdog. 132.5 to 133.5 is your total. And I said Northwestern has a 21.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Chicago State. Fully recognize that this is a Chicago State team that can be a little bit grody, but I do think that they're going to be able to do a good job holding up in this game because they've got some very nice versatility with a pair of guys in Deshaun Corbett along with Wesley Cardit, who will be able to combine for in the neighborhood about 30.5 points per contest. Corbin, he's been really your top rebounder with about 7 boards, a steal and a half per contest. Meanwhile, Cardit shoots in the mid-30s from 3-point range. Both of these teams, relatively slow-tempo teams outside the top 200, and for Northwestern, they're in the bottom 50 in terms of total possessions per game, and where I do think Chicago State is going to have a tough time in this one is just taking care of the ball. They do turn the ball over 14 times per game, and Northwestern has gotten better and better with regards to their turnovers the last 2 years. They've ranked in the top 40 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Meanwhile, for Northwestern, UMBC has been the man in the backcourt for this team. He is getting a little bit of help in terms of facilitation from Ryan Langborg, who's been able to give you 2.5 assists per game, but for UMBC, 18.5 points, 5 assists, shooting in the mid-30s from 3-point range for a Northwestern team that's right now turning the ball over 7.9 times per game. Last year, they were a top 3 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per-possession basis. They are well on the way to doing that once again this year. And for the Chicago State team, where I can give them a little bit of credit, is that the defense has held up. 66 points or fewer surrendered in 3 of their last 4 games. And that includes a game against Loyola Chicago. That includes a game against St. Thomas. And it sets a team that lights up a lot of teams with regards to their 3-point shooting. Meanwhile, for Northwestern, sans that overtime game against Purdue, this team has also been able to do an absolutely incredible job with regards to their defense, as they have allowed north of 66 points just once as far this season. Actually, north of 67 points just once this season. That came in their game against Purdue. Obviously, that was a harebrained game, but I do think that this is going to be a slowed down, sloggy game where Northwestern certainly going to be able to execute better on offense. Brooks Beinheiser has a nice little advantage on low with his 8 rebounds per game, but I do think that with Chicago State in a low possession game, they do enough to be able to hold in there. Set my line at 21.5, so going to be willing to take the points with Chicago State and made my total at 129.5, so also going in on the under. 306.547, 306.548. Alabama A&M plays us to UAB. UAB is an 11 to 11.5 point road favorite. Your total is 152.5, and I did say UAB is a 10-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Alabama A&M. Now, it's been a trying year for Alabama A&M, to say the least, but I do think that they're going to be able to hold in there despite the fact that defensively it has been a rough year for them, to say the least. 342nd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. But again, I do think that the home court advantage is going to be very big for this team. They're giving up 15.7 points fewer per 100 possessions when they are at home rather than when they are on the road. And this is just a UAB offense that they aren't what they were a season ago. I think that they're going to tick up in terms of their 3-point shooting percentage, which is currently 26.8%. They don't have a single guy in the roster shooting above 33% from 3-point range, but I mean, for UAB, this is just not the same team without Jelly Walker from season ago. Eric Gaines has had to take over the reins as main point guard, 3.5 assists, 13.5 points per game, but he's turning the ball over right around 3 times per contest. UAB is still a fast team, but they're not as up-tempo as they were a season ago, as they're looking to a pair of transfers from the junior college level in Alejandro Vasquez, the XL Lenborg, to really be able to hold things down with Lenborg. He's been one of your top rebounders with about 7.5 rebounds per game, but this team doesn't have as much depth as they have in past years, and I'm noticing that they're going a little bit more to Daniel Ortiz. Ortiz has really been able to light it up recently as he's been able to give the team a combined 45 points in the last 4 games. I do think that this is a good move for them. Last year at North Alabama, shot over 40% from 3-point range, but for Alabama A&M, even with them having a limited amount of scoring options as Dallin Smith is really the lone guy returning for a season to go, I do think that the way that they generate a little bit over 9 steals per game, it's going to be impactful. In fact, Caleb Blackwell be able to give you a little bit north of 2 steals per game. Now, for Alabama A&M, I was alluding to UAB and their 3-point shooting. They're shooting 23.2% from 3-point range. They've got one guy with north of 3 points per game that's shooting above 26.5% from 3-point range. That should be going northward for them. Now, do I think it's going to be going to the moon? No, but at the same time, I do think that's going to be going northward for Alabama A&M as well. They're going to need to shore up things on the glass. They don't have a single guy that's right now giving you north of 4 rebounds per game, but it's not a UAB team with necessarily a lot of size. 6'6" Amari Peak is able to give you about 3 boards, 8.5 points per game. I think that Alabama A&M holds in there in game, which I do think is going to be featuring a lot of turnovers and a lot of sloppy play in general, but I do think that that's going to result in some fast break buckets. I did set my total 154. Alabama A&M, one of the more up-tempo teams in all of college basketball, so looking at the over, and we'll take north of 10 with Alabama A&M. 306-549, 306-550. Louisiana plays us to Eastern Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky, a 3 to 4 point underdog. Totals between 148.5 and 149. Did set my total of 155. I'm looking at the over with Louisiana. They're not playing at a breakneck pace, but they just play a lot of high-scoring games because this offense has been able to do a pretty solid job of executing, and this defense is leaving a whole heck of a lot of something to be desired. As for Louisiana, they are currently 281st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis. Now, I will say this. With Louisiana, they are literally giving up north of 30 points fewer per 100 possessions at home rather than on the road. I think that was a very big outlier in general, and I do think that that is going to be something that is going to be coming back down to earth in a very big way. And they go up against an Eastern Kentucky team that right now they're allowing opponents to shoot north of 45% from 3-point range. It's absolutely wild. They themselves shoot in the mid-30s from 3-point range. You know that you're going to be able to get some good scoring out of this team, as you've been able to get a combined 32 points out of Devontae Blanton, along with Llewellyn Walker. Walker is a little bit more of a facilitator for the team with about 5 assists per game. Meanwhile, Blanton, he's someone that stands right around 6'6", 6'7". He and Michael Moreno, who stands in that same vicinity, are both giving you about 6.5 rebounds per game. It's an Eastern Kentucky team that has a lifeblood of really generating steals. They are able to get right around 10 per contest, and they've protected the ball relatively well as well. They only are turning the ball for about 12.5 times per contest. For their tempo, that's relatively solid. Then you've got Isaiah Kozart, who's, I'm not even kidding you, averaging 5.6 blocks per contest. Yeah, that currently leads all of college basketball. So if Eastern Kentucky is able to force anyone inside, they're able to have great success. The problem is they just get absolutely cooked from the outside. And this is a Louisiana team that they do have those guys. They're able to light it up from 3-point range. I think that they should see a little regression to their 38.5% 3-point shooting. But I mean, for Kendall Garnett, this is the 3rd straight year in which he's shooting at least 40% from 3-point range. He's been able to log about 9 points per game. Kobe Julian, 48% 3-point shooting should come down a little bit, but 20.5 points, 4.5 boards, 2 steals per game. He has been incredible. And then you've got Thamus Folks, who's done a nice job with an assist to turnover ratio of 2, about 5 assists, 2.5 turnovers per game. Love what I've seen out of him. It's a little bit of a top-heavy Louisiana team, but we've been noticing a little bit more from someone like a Michael Thomas, who's been able to give you 6 points per game. Joe Charles has been able to give you a little bit over a block per contest. I like his prospects down low, being able to give you about 8 boards, shooting 36% from 3-point range for Eastern Kentucky. With them giving up so much to the outside, I think that that is going to be their kryptonite in a game where I think that things are going to be very up and down. I set my total at 155. We're going to have the over with Louisiana. Want to lay up to 4.5 with them, and we end things with my DK Network right a pick. This is 306-551, 306-552. Auburn and UNC Asheville do battle from the Von Buren Center out there in Huntsville, Alabama. So technically a neutral court game, but in the state of Alabama, with Auburn, a 18 to an 18.5 point favorite. Totals between 147 to 147.5, and my right up here is going to be on this total over. I set my total at a 154. neither of these teams play at a breakneck pace, but both of these teams are relatively fast. You've got an Auburn team that's right in the neighborhood about 147th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and then you've got UNC Asheville more around 72nd, and for UNC Asheville, this team has been getting absolutely destroyed on defense. They're outside of the top 310 in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis for this UNC Asheville team. A big reason why is that they just don't do a good job of being able to guard the arc, as this has been one of the worst three-point shooting defenses in all of college basketball. And a season ago, that wouldn't matter too much because last year, Auburn, they were right around about 309th in terms of three-point shooting percentage, and it's still not amazing, but now they're up to about 204th in the country in terms of three-point shooting percentage. Aiden Holloway has been able to give you about 13.1 points per contest. He is shooting north of 39% from three-point range. Jalen Williams is back from a season ago when he was one of the better three-point shooters in this roster as well. And then you've got Holloway coupled with Trey Donaldson, who are both able to give you about 3 assists per game as well. Meanwhile, you've got a Auburn team that, while they do rank about 39th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per-possession basis, this team has their vulnerabilities as well. When they're away from home, and this is technically a neutral court game, they're giving up 15 points more per 100 possessions rather than when they are on the road. And amazingly, UNC Asheville is actually averaging right around about 4.5 to 5 points more per 100 possessions in a road/neutral court game rather than when they are at home. So that is something to take note of. And you do have Drew Pember, who's just been absolutely incredible for this UNC Asheville team. He's down a little bit from what he did last season, when last season he was putting up 20 points, 8 boards, 2.5 blocks per contest, but he's still someone that at 6'10" is able to shoot in the mid-30s from three-point range. It's still giving you 17 plus points, 7 plus boards per contest. And then you do have Caleb Burgess, who does a nice job of running an efficient just offense in general. For UNC Asheville, they've worked on their turnovers, and really both of these teams have. Last year, Auburn was right around 130th in the country in terms of turnovers on a per possession basis. They're more like 56th this year, and for Asheville, they were outside the top 300 with this regard. They're up to right around about 200th this year, so it's not like it's quantum leaps and bounds, but both of these teams, they have been able to get much better possessions this year than they were able to a season ago, and I do think that that's going to be impactful because Auburn, in terms of both opponents' 2-point and 3-point shooting percentage, is in the top 30 nationally, so it's all about taking care of the ball. Now, I will say this about Auburn. They are allowing opponents to shoot just 36.1% from inside the arc from 2-point range when they're at home. On the road, this does rise up to about 47.8%. So I do think that Pember is going to be able to find a little bit of success here. Certainly, G&I Broom is able to do a nice job down low, giving this team right around 6 to 7 rebounds per game. He and Dylan Cardwell are combined to average about 2 to 2.5 blocks per game. But I do think that with UNC Asheville getting north of 18, they're going to be able to hang in there with Pember, and with that improved backcourt, I'm going to be willing to take 18 plus with UNC Asheville on my write-up. I see a nice up and down game set by total 154. So looking at the over, and that will wrap things up for the Wednesday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family podcast. A big thanks to Blake Lovell, who does great work over at Southeastern 14. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at JNN_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM. Maybe it does not matter. As per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I'm coming at you guys every single day throughout the college basketball season. That means I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in.